Uploading.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
No! I will make them pay.
One of the most commonly discussed issues among those who focus on Legacy Trek is the discussion over how Starfleet treats its fleet as a scientific flotilla. While ships can either be scientific or exploration, every one of them also pulls double duty for this defense. It's honestly a flawed belief that you can have a scientific organization that daylights as a military and there'd be no problems. But to be fair, I guess, combat's a small purview in what a captain is expected to do in their lives.
I think it's a waste of effort to test our combat skills. It's a minor province in the makeup of a starship captain.
We're still at red alert. Target those ships and fire.
Stand by. I'll see if I can get the Klingons' attention.
Mr. Worf, prepare a spread of photon torpedoes. We have to hit them the instant they begin to close.
Nothing would make me happier than you giving me an excuse to kick your treacherous Talsiar ass.
While I'll give my thoughts on how I would have rewritten the Federation Starfleet later, or how I would have organized it as a Starfleet Admiral, let's first take a look at the 23rd century. It's important to remember that during the early to mid-23rd century, and arguably the late 23rd century, Starfleet would delineate between the two different roles that their fleets conducted. There would be vessels that were scientific ships, and there would be those meant for combat. The only difference is that when vessels made for war were not needed, they would be utilized for cargo, transportation, diplomacy, and exploration. But it was not hidden that they were also ships of war. The USS Enterprise, no bloody A, B, C, D, or E, would be one of these types of vessels with a fully integrated crew. The reason it was one of these ships is that, well, you see it in the design of the Constitution class, formerly known as Starship class. One of the largest ships of its time, or it was supposed to be until Discovery, the vessel was conceived to take a hit, but also had an amazing amount of space. The vessel's defenses were also paired to match that of an enemy that would literally hide itself in plain sight and was known for murderous raids. The design, as stated, would allow for cargo, diplomacy, and combat. While the ship did have sensors, scientific research was not the sole purpose, and thus these systems were advanced, but not necessarily top of the line. Scientific discovery would be something the Constitution class did, and it did it a lot, but only after its main duties were completed. And again, they never hid what the Constitution was. I'll admit that it is somewhat debated due to changes behind the scenes, but the Miranda class, which originally was known to be the Avenger class, was also pretty well armed, at least for its size. Its weapons would puncture the armor of a Constitution class. To be fair though, this is Starfleet, and they don't really, do the armor thing? Not until ablative armor comes about, and that was still But regardless, the Miranda was pretty tough. Not only that, but during the 23rd century, we know that there was some semblance of a science fleet due to the Oberth, which was utilized and owned by civilians, but also had Starfleet personnel on board that would assist. We also know that Starfleet did have its own flotilla as well, so there were Starfleet and civilian variants. And then, after winning several wars, Starfleet would begin to integrate everything and just mix all of it up. And in the end, after Spock brokered peace between the Federation and the Klingons...
Are we talking about mothballing the Starfleet?
Well, I'm sure that our exploration and scientific programs would be unaffected, Captain, but...
Federation would begin to mix all of these ships up, and even quote-unquote mothball the battle fleet. And after that, the Federation would begin to propagandize its people.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
Captain, you're not going to start an incident.
Admiral Mendeck, I will take whatever action is necessary to obtain the return of the ambassador. This is Captain Picard of the Enterprise. I'm taking command of the fleet. Target all of your weapons onto the following coordinates.
Like 1,000 other commanders on 1,000 other battlefields, I wait for the dawn.
So now, you have Starfleet vessels that are claimed to be primarily scientific, but have the ability to stun entire continents and destroy worlds. This is a problem because when you get ships that aren't that powerful, you're going to get a lot of people killed. The ironic thing is that there is a really easy fix. You do what happened in the 23rd century. You break up the two fleets. You have a science and medical division, as well as an actual military and exploration division. And here's how it would work. Firstly, scientific and medical vessels would be required to broadcast their status as such at all times. It would be clearly known that they are designated for scientific and medical purposes that are focused on civilian advancement. They may have Starfleet officers on them, but this would generally be to assist a civilian contingent and would also not have a heavy security focus. These ships would have more weapons than an Oberth, certainly, but would only have enough to come into parity with pirate elements in the area. Certainly, the vessels would not be able to stand toe-to-toe with warships, and indeed, it is possible that the Starfleet military side may have to provide protection from time to time for these vessels. Though, to be clear, this would be to protect the ships from pirates and would not be to assist science divisions in military operations. The two would always stay separate. Scientific and medical vessels would not be allowed to support Starfleet's military nor their exploration department without the vessel itself being completely converted into a military ship. Scientific and medical vessels would also have a very large blue streak that runs across the sides, top, and bottom of the ship. Since apparently fighting close up is the modus operandi in this universe, that would make it easy to tell which ship is which. This is a plus because even if the non-military vessel cannot broadcast its status as a non-military ship, then just looking at it makes it obvious. Lastly, any attack on such a target, not to even mention the destruction, would be treated as an attack on a civilian target. It would be the same as destroying a transport or eliminating a colony. The response would be extremely harsh by Starfleet's military once it's realized. As I kind of stated, the Starfleet military elements would never use their science counterpart for military operations, and thus the cost will mean that attacking a military vessel, like that of a Defiant, would cause a far more measured response than that of a science-oriented ship. And to be clear, that doesn't mean the militarized Starfleet part wouldn't have the ability to scan things. They would be given sensors and the ability to go out and verify information utilizing advanced technologies. They just wouldn't have a civilian element. And let's just get into the tactical fleet since we're on that topic now. This would include, as I've mentioned, both exploration and military vessels. Before we get into my justification of the exploration division and why it has to be a part of the tactical fleet, the identifiers of military units would be quite obvious. First, they would generally identify themselves as military, and they'd have large red stripes that would, like their counterparts, be on the top, sides, and below. The point of this would be to make sure that hostile elements would know what vessel they are fighting. The point is to ensure the safety of civilians and the science branch. Now, I'm sure people question why I decided to include the exploration division as a part of the military. The fact is that an exploration vessel probably requires all of the abilities and offensive weaponry of a military ship. When you're going into parts unknown, you have to be able to defend yourself and feed those a part of the crew. Additionally, it is possible in first contact situations for misunderstandings to occur. And given that some species are highly advanced, you need to be able to defend yourself. Also, it just makes sense for the military to at least be aware of what is occurring and if hostile elements are encountered out of their zone of influence. Vessels that were a part of the science and medical divisions could include Mirandas, Oberths, California class, transports, and others, while the military division would have Constitution class, Galaxy class, Sovereign, Defiant, Acura, and many more. By delineating out between the two, nations and organizations would be able to better fit the vessels with the people for the job. By delineating out between the two, Federation member worlds would be able to better fit the vessels with the people for the job, as well as limiting casualties. Enemy nations would know which ships to attack and which not to. A lot of them, at least. Not all, because, Klingon's gonna Klingon. In the end, two fleets do need to be designated. I think that this is the best way to ensure peace and tranquility, as well as, again, make sure a lot of people don't die. But all of these are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below.